Yashiro, a lazy man who's known in Tokyo's underworld as the Reaper, the strongest bounty hunter who couldn't care less about heroism. In a city where crime bosses known as demon lords gain terrifying powers through ether enhancement, the only ones who can stop them are known as the hero's assassins. But for Yashiro though, it's never about justice. He's lazy, prefers working alone, and only takes a job if the money is worth it. Our story begins from Shibuya, where progress in medical procedure to gain magic power paved the way for the mafia underworld to transform into a kingdom of darkness. However, there's also hunters, who are called the heroic braves, that were actively going after the bounties of these gangstas. One of them, Jogamena Aki, found herself on the back foot against 3 mafia members. Seeing how stupidly resilient Aki was, one of the gangsters decided to shoot her with a small rock. Elsewhere, a certain Yashiro, despite playing the cool guy on the phone, realized that he has practically no money to do anything. If he withdrew some more money from the bank, he won't be able to afford rent, food, transportation, and the Joker's biggest fear, the IRS. While he was hoping for a quick cash job to secure ends meet, Yashiro was surprised to see Aki falling next to him. He knew that he was scum, but not the type that would abandon someone in pain. When he approached her hoping that she was no longer of this world, Yashiro took notice that the girl had an injection site on her neck, which meant that that girl is a brave. If that wasn't enough, Yashiro found himself cornered by one of the thugs who had attacked Aki earlier. Hoping to save himself, Yashiro tried to persuade the thug into forgetting that they had ever met, but the latter refused, as he forced the scum to either be gotten rid of right after Aki or get tortured badly before getting eliminated. Upon contemplating whether he should run or not, and the badly injured Aki urging him to run, Yashiro decided to take a different approach. He asked the young thug about who his master was, before claiming that he serves a dark lord of his own, which means that butting heads with him would turn into a turmoil. The young thug hesitated at first, but upon Yashiro injecting himself, he realized that he's dealing with a brave, which made him decide on shooting him. What he didn't anticipate, however, was Yashiro's ability to dodge all incoming attacks in slow motions in Keanu Reeves style, before pacifying the young fella. Just as he was about to finish him off, Aki stopped him, arguing that it's pointless to further put the hurt on someone who's badly beaten. Hearing this, Yashiro agreed, but proceeded to eliminate the guy anyway. If that wasn't enough, Yashiro blatantly lied about the thug eliminating his entire family, but Aki wasn't buying that lie. Nevertheless, nothing could change the outcome for Yashiro, much less with her inability to punish him. Furthermore, Yashiro argued that Aki should quit being a brave while she still got the chance, because the worst of the worst becomes a 1. Just as he advised her to check the hospital for her injuries, Yashiro was about to dip out of this mayhem, or so he thought, as he almost found himself fighting a newly arrived Indo Yukine if Aki didn't explain the situation quickly enough. Concluding that this mess was dealt with, Yashiro made for the nearest bar to have a drink with his friends. Upon entering the bar, Yashiro saw that the bartender, Ed, wasn't pleased with his arrival, as he wasn't eager to serve someone eating and drinking on a tap. Not pleased by that, Yashiro paid for a can of beer before joining his friends, namely Joe and Ishino. The former was about to pick a fight with Yashiro for coming late, but the latter thought it'd be better if they just got along instead. If anything, it was only Ed's glare from afar that prevented the two from trading blows. The trio then sat down to play their favorite card game, when Aki and Yukini entered the bar. Ed tried to dismiss them initially, but allowed them in after learning that they're also braves. To everyone's surprise, Aki approached Yashiro and thanked him for saving her earlier, before requesting he becomes their commander, as they hoped that Yashiro would help them save a friend of theirs from a Dark Lord. When do they need to save her, you might ask? It's tonight. Naturally, Yashiro figured that the girls came from Shibuya Academy, where female braves are trained to be sent to fight Dark Lords in the underworld. In essence, the Academy is a program of producing assassins. Since he hated their guts, Yashiro refused Aki's request, while making it crystal clear that he only got involved because the thug attacked him earlier. Despite that, Aki insists that he joins her, since they need to save their comrade tonight, as well as the Academy requiring them to only go on missions in parties of 3. Once Aki was done with her speech, Yashiro asked if she was trying to convince him to join by relaying the story of her life, to which she agreed, much to his dismay. Yashiro tried to throw the persistent Aki out, but she assumed that he was demonstrating a perfectly executed shoulder throw. While Yashiro was trying to dismiss her, he got infuriated by Yukine calling him useless. Worse yet, Joe and Inshinu were mocking him for being called as such. In response, Yashiro tried to save himself by claiming that he just won't help them, instead of can't help them. That is the case until he heard that the Dark Lord they're trying to save is none other than the Count of Amber Thorns. To their surprise, Yashiro knew their target well, as he claimed that he's often engaged in a variety of traffics before pulling an Uno reverse and began to mock the girls for having their friend kidnapped by some run-off-the-mill lord like that. Enraged by Yashiro's mockery, Yukine decided to pull her substance to make full use of her power, before vanishing into thin air to rescue her friend. This surprised Yashiro and his friends, to whom Aki claimed that Yukine can perceive gaps in space which allows her to jump through certain distances instantly. As for Aki, she decided to stay to secure his help, as she believed mind-believably that Yashiro was lying. Despite that, Yashiro admitted that he believes that the Lord of Amber Thorns won't do anything that will ruin her friend's value, as he'll just keep her safe in exchange for a large ransom, which encouraged Aki that they still have time and all the more reason to save her friend, Sayara Kashiwagi Pendragon. With Joe gambling on Yashiro taking a beating, and Ed insisting he take on a bounty, Yashiro decided to abandon being cautious and join into the fray, as he didn't want to become your average type of scum, while also asking Aki for a 20 millions as payment for his participation, to which Aki agreed to do so eventually. As such, after getting a key from Ed, Yashiro joined Aki, while Ishino did bet on Yoshino retiring from life altogether. While they were inspecting weapons to use, Ed argued that they might be facing swarms of guards, but Yashiro was confident that they could overcome any challenge as long as Yukine is ahead, and as long as they got the bastard sword, which impressed Aki by how long and hard it is, no pun intended. While they were at it, the bar itself got raided by a bunch of thugs, who instantly took a beating from Joe and Ishino. More importantly for Yashiro, Aki did see that the Amber Thorns Lord can use some sort of spell to paralyze others, which assured Yashiro that eliminating him would be a very doable task. Once they got back to the beer hall, Aki was surprised to see the thugs getting defeated by Joe and Ishino, before Yashiro promised to make an even cooler show for her. After a long explanation over what E3, the substance that boosts Brave's powers, Yashiro and Aki sat in a corner close enough to Amber Thorn's HQ, where all accesses were sealed off by guards, which made Aki decide on striking the iron while it's still hot. While Sayara was brought in the most humiliating way to the Dark Lord, Aki began to enthusiastically ask Yashiro to help her waltz in, to which he argued against, especially against everything wrong that might turn their plan into a disaster. At least the air-headed Aki understood that they should avoid needless fighting at all costs. After making sure she's following along correctly, as well as making sure that she knows right from left, Yashiro gave Aki a mask, as it was a Brave equipment. After wearing her mask and putting on her grumpy ex's face, Yashiro and Aki approached the guards and claimed that they were reinforcements that were on their way back from robbing a bank. Before he knew it, the guard found himself paralyzed, then eliminated by Yashiro. Admittedly, Yashiro confessed that there could be other Braves that would have done that same job without resorting to eliminating the guard. But the die is cast, and after injecting himself with E3, Aki decided to follow him to prevent any further bloodshed. Speaking of bloodshed, Yukine had already caused chaos in her infiltration of HQ, which impressed Yashiro as much as Aki's musclehead did. Despite that, Yashiro was certain that Yukine would still lose on her own, as the ether perception of the Amber Thorns Lord counters people with teleportation ability, which makes sneak attacks against him obsolete. As such, Yashiro made sure to tell Aki to not do anything at all in this battle. And he literally meant anything, as her ether perception could turn into a hazard in the hands of an amateur like Aki. By the time they got to an upper floor, Aki made the unexpected decision to turn the opposite direction that Yashiro took, as there were more opponents in hers. That didn't matter much to Yashiro, as he used his ether perception to play the Matrix once again to devastating effect. However, Yashiro also had to remind himself of what's important in his life, because the E3 substance can make him lose control of himself to the point he can act like any of the Dark Lords. Fortunately for him, that didn't happen. As they further went inside of HQ, the duo noticed how grand the area was, which baffled Yashiro and impressed Aki. While Aki was making sure of Aki's readiness, the Dark Lord's court door opened up, with Yukine badly injured. Although he didn't want to do so, Yashiro ended up relenting to his inner voices to rescue Yukine. After ensuring that the injured girl will stay out of this mess, Yashiro went to face the Dark Lord on his own. Naturally, Sayara was in a miserable state herself, much to Aki's surprise. Since he came to her rescue, Yashiro didn't take kindly to her hostility towards him, even if she believed that he's another lapdog sent by her father. Naturally, the Dark Lord didn't take kindly to this entire spiel happening in his presence. He decided to shut both girls up, before beginning to intimidate Yashiro, who was determined to eliminate him anyway. Unfortunately for the Lord of Amber Thorns, he has no Dark Lords that operate under him. On top of that, he has a large bounty of 3 millions atop himself, which means that taking him down will provide Yashiro with easy cash. Before the fighting even started, the Count asked Yashiro about who had sent him. Seeing how rattled the Count was, Yashiro played this to his advantage, before throwing a smoke screen in the area. This was a cunning move, since the gas wasn't poisoned. Yashiro intended to use this smoke screen to prevent the Count from using his ability, which relies on locating professional braves. With the Count now moving blindly in the dark, and with his ability to manipulate time to his advantage, Yashiro made his way to the Count, who he made lose his arm. Before he could finish him off for good, however, Yashiro was surprised to see the Count regenerating his hand, which he had no control over at all. So much so that he eliminated one of his guards, before turning to Sayara and Yukini. Although Yashiro was enraged by Yukini's stupidity for risking her life for her friend, he was also well aware that he has a second to finish off the Count. Faced with the fact that he'll have to let both girls be unalive to ensure he safely eliminates the Count, Yashiro remembered what his old master, Takamiya Kyoto, claiming that anyone can pretend that they're not scummier than crap if their lices are not on the line, which made Yashiro finally move to protect Yukine and Sayara from the Count. Despite absorbing the hit for them, Yashiro still needed to figure out a way to eliminate the Count from this abysmal position. Aware that they'll get hit once again, Yashiro thought of casting his spell aside, before getting tossed away by the Count anyway. Just as he was bracing himself to get finished off for good by his opponent, Yashiro was surprised to see that his life was saved by Aki, who disarmed the Count, before proceeding to pacify him completely, thus ensuring their victory, which could never be established without Aki's ability to read people's thoughts. A few days later, Yashiro lost another round against Isshinyu in their card game. Despite that, he claimed he figured what his weaknesses were and that he won't lose again, before getting a "that's what he said" type of comment from Joe. Speaking of which, when Joe asked about the Count of Amberthorn's fate, Yashiro wasn't certain. As Mice, the Count's his arm never regenerated before getting handed over to the academy. Annoyingly for him, Isshinyu was intrigued by the Count's regenerative ability. From what Yashiro learned, Braves and Demon Kings can obtain the power of regenerating limbs, but they lose it if the limbs were cut off from blood flow, which explains why they still use swords and other medieval weapons. Moreover, Yashiro couldn't shake the thought that Thorn was treating him like an organization's errand boy. But when Isshinyu requested they look into the case, Yashiro refused, since this won't get them any money. With that aside, Joe couldn't help but mock Yashiro for abusing E3 in that mission, which, if he continued, will eventually turn him into a junkie. If that wasn't bad enough, Yashiro had to bear up with Isshinyu calling him out as a commander of some schoolgirls, especially that they learned nothing from their teachers, and it shows by how dense and stupid they were. And Ishinu's suggestion to work for them for 100 grand yen a month each didn't convince Yashiro to change his mind. On the other hand, Joe wasn't buying any of it, because if he did refuse such a job, then none of the academy girls would ever show up, which they did just now. After assuring Ed that they came in to thank and pay respect to their lord and savior Yashiro, Aki happily stated that they couldn't secure him his payment yet. Instead, she decided to give him her monthly tuition for the time being, which didn't sit well with Yashiro. He tried to get the girls to get out of his sight at once, but Ahi insisted that they're ready to undergo strict training under him. While he was trying to get his rejection through Aki's thick skull, Yukine apologized to Yashiro for her absurd behavior during the mission, before beginning to think of challenging him right then and there. Fortunately for everyone, Sayara seemed to be the most level-headed of these two buffoons despite her odd appearance, according to Yashiro. It initially irritated Sayara, but she still apologized for getting him into so much trouble. After all, the trio are still on the verge of getting kicked out of the academy, but Yashiro remained unfazed. Although disappointed, Sayara decided to pass Yashiro to her father through the phone. Yashiro was reluctant, but still picked up the phone anyway. On the other side of the phone, the father, Arthur Pendragon, addressed Yashiro as the Grim Reaper for some reason, which is definitely not foreshadowing, before expressing his gratitude. only for Yashiro to call his manners as trash, as well as other things. After bearing up with Yashiro's disrespect, Arthur decided to introduce himself, as well as his position as a director of the Japanese branch of the academy, before acknowledging Yashiro's achievement during the BFE conflict 2 years ago. Furthermore, Arthur addressed Yashiro as the outstanding brave that eliminated Lord Radiant Serpent. Hearing this, the already shocked Yashiro wondered why Arthur never intervened to save his daughter, only to be answered that he can't afford to abuse his powers. Yashiro then argued that Saria isn't fit to be a brave, to which Arthur agreed, but also added that his daughter, as well as her friends, do have some mental issues as braves. And since Arthur can't afford to make changes in the academy on his own, he became glad upon learning that the trio trusts Yashiro with their lives. The latter tried to argue against it, but Arthur stopped him in his tracks by making this as a stable job, which is better than collecting 20 million yen from minors. If that wasn't mortifying enough for Yashiro, Joe and Ishino, being the true homies that they are, began mocking their homie before the schoolgirls, only to be surprised that Aki still insisted on having him as their teacher. Seeing this, Yashiro requested another drink from Ed. With the night still young, Aki decided to introduce herself properly, which Yashiro argued against. If anything, he wanted the girls gone at once, even though Joe and Ishino encouraged them to stay by cheering them up and feeding them. Seeing that Ishino gave his visit card to Saira, Yashiro finally snapped. By the time Yashiro finished his own drink, the girls were ready to go, but not before getting told that he wants no disciples at all. The next day, Yashiro woke up in his peaceful apartment, where he did his usual routine, until he noticed that he had no food. The moment he left to buy some food, Yashiro was apoplectic to see Yukine waiting for him after Ishino doxed him to her and the other girls, like a true homie. I'm sure that Yashiro was very happy about it, and it shows. Aside from that, Yashiro insisted on refusing every offer to serve as Yukine's tutor, while repeating to her that he's not there for the money. He even went as far as to refuse her offer to buy him food. To Yukine, she can live a very comfortable life with the money she gets from the academy, as well as her free residence at the dormitory. As for Yashiro, he has several places where he can always sleep, he claimed, as he can't settle down somewhere and work properly. Yukine assumed that Yashiro might be jobless, but that wasn't the case. If anything, being a high-level brave brought nothing to Yashiro but even more attention from demon lords, who are increasingly interested in taking him down, as well as hyped folks that want to recruit him. To his surprise, Yukine learned about that from one four-eyed homie of his. Hearing this, as well as taking notice of a suspicious figure outside the restaurant, Yashiro advised Yukine to quit being a brave, since her eventual reliance on E3 will get her cooked one day. Once they left the restaurant, Yashiro made sure to tell Yukine that he still has no interest in being her master. Although Yukine didn't answer that, the two were well aware that they were being followed by some thugs. As such, upon entering a dark alley, they injected themselves with E3, before finding themselves surrounded by Harumi's siblings, who were led by the Wedge of both hands. The latter in particular was so eager to get revenge, especially after Yashiro disrespecting his lord. Although he wanted to eliminate him, the Wedge was tasked with bringing Yashiro alive to the lord's presence. Hearing this, Yashiro rejected the offer. After all, Yashiro considered Wedge's lord, the Demon King, to be a pain to deal with, as he still insisted on recruiting him no matter what. Even if they end up kidnapping Yashiro, the thugs will still have many ways to force him to work for them. Despite that, and after Yashiro mistaking Wedge's bounty for being lower than what it should be, Wedge pulled his daggers out in preparation for the fight. With more thugs emerging out of the woods, Yashiro made for an obvious choice. Complaining about Wedge calling this a fair fight, Wedge argued that Yashiro also brought a subordinate as well, before getting taken aback by Yashiro's denial. If that wasn't enough, Wedge began accusing Yashiro of being too old to be on a certain island, which angered both Yashiro and Yukine, who proceeded in pulling out their weapons. Yashiro approved Yukine's desire to eliminate Wedge, but only allowed her after giving her the signal, since he's a formidable opponent. With Wedge making the first move, Yashiro entered his matrix mode once again, while contemplating his next course of action. Once his mind was made, Yashiro eliminated 3 of his attackers initially, and another one while protecting Yukine. However, he was still aware that the weight of the numbers are going to wear the 2 of them down eventually. As such, Yashiro used his time manipulation ability to deflect any incoming attacks towards Yukine once again, while eliminating more enemies and repelling more incoming attacks, before mocking Wedge once again. Livid about Yashiro's show of force, Wedge decided to retaliate by intensifying his attacks, only to be appalled by Yashiro's ability to destroy his remote hand, which was guiding the daggers attacking the Grim Reaper. Consequently, Yashiro gave the signal to Yukine to attack Wedge, which she did instantly. Although he got saved by the Harumi siblings, and despite managing to save himself, Wedge thought it best to dip out of the fight, which he had clearly lost. Despite his men scattering in all directions, Yashiro stood before two injured men of Wedge, whom he tasked Yukine with binding them with zip ties until authorities came up to detain them. However, that didn't stop Yashiro from looting the detainees. Despite being disappointed, Yukine was relieved to learn that she was of some use to Yashiro, even though he insisted that he's not going to be her instructor. A few days later, Yashiro realized that he's still broke, which he blamed it all on Yukine. His biggest concern now was finding a gig before the end of the month to afford his basic needs. He initially contemplated selling the extra E3 doses he had or getting a gig for some Dark Lord, which they were illegal. While he was lost in thoughts, Yashiro received a message that made him decide to make for Ed's bar. Upon entering the bar, Yashiro was not pleased at all with seeing the happy-go-lucky Aki and his four-eyed homie. When Yashiro asked Aki about what she's doing there, Ishino admitted that he invited her. With how thick-skulled Aki was, Yashiro thought it best to just ignore her, before learning from Ishino that he got a job for her, which is related to her last encounter with Amber Thorns. To Yashiro's surprise, Aki accepted the job, since her ability to read people's thoughts is her greatest asset. Seeing that Yashiro refused to ever get involved, Ishino began to wonder if Yashiro was losing his edge after Malta's passing. With Ishino having a job to attend to later, and Aki insisting on knowing who Malta is and refusing to leave, let alone Ed now calling him out for being noisier than his disciple, Yashiro decided to leave the bar, but not before Ishino requesting him to serve as Aki's bodyguard during the investigation. Yashiro initially refused, but had a change of heart instantly upon hearing that he'll get paid 115,000 yen, roughly 723 bucks in freedom currency. Granted, Yashiro was indebted to Ishino with that same amount, which would make them even at least. When Yashiro attempted to reject the offer, Ishino reminded him of some felonies he committed, which forced Yashiro to take the job against his will. In casual clothes too, which made Aki exchange thanks for an indifferent Yashiro, even if her comment on Yashiro's disguise outfit could be posted on MTV Yo Mama Season 2 to be honest. Despite that, Yashiro thought it best to proceed with their mission anyway. Before he knew it, Ika pointed out to a club, which made Yashiro remember a report that Ishino provided him about receiving E3, even though he refused to tell him about the question that Aki will ask him later on. To his surprise, Aki injected herself with E3, as that will increase her effectiveness in identifying culprits in public places, which made sense to Yashiro. In only a matter of time, the duo assumed that they found their targets. However, Yashiro was surprised to see Aki getting increasingly uncomfortable, as her ability proved to be ineffective to use in public places. A few days later, Yashiro was playing card games with Ed, to whom he lost as always, before turning to watch TV instead of being a productive member in society, where he was still following the case of a missing panda, which is a species that's known for speedrunning its bloodline down to extinction. Nevertheless, there was allegedly someone that stole the panda from the zoo. To make matters worse, security camera footage failed to confirm the removal, which implies that it was the work of an ether perspective user. While Yashiro was thinking of why a person would steal a panda, he was taken aback by Seira entering the bar, as she had a personal request from him, only for Yashiro to dismiss her. Unsurprisingly, Seira stayed. Like her two comrades, Seira came in to ask for help. What did she do, you may ask? Since she's a second-year student, she needs to fulfill a period of public service. What type of public services? By searching for missing people in notoriously dangerous areas or eliminating dangerous monsters. To ensure her credibility, Saria would need either a teacher or an outsider professional brave to oversee her. Granted, academy teachers refused, since they never wanted to get connected to her family ties. After all, her father was against the idea of becoming a brave in the first place. That wasn't the point for Sara, however, as she cared about passing this assignment to prove a point to the school. Moreover, Sara mentioned that the pro-brave that will participate will get paid by the academy, with 2 doses of E3. Although that was disappointing for Yashiro, Sara also added that sometimes the client with the job pays a separate fee, as was the case with Metro PD, where 4 police dogs were about to be kidnapped. Despite 3 of them being recovered, the Shiba dog of them still got kidnapped. Thankfully, the tracking device on the Shiba dog's collar indicated that he's located in a dangerous place where there's likely a stray Dark Lord. Her task is pretty simple. Sierra will only need to check the place and write a report. but she also believed that going as far as to rescue Kogumi the Shiba, or even its collar, will get them a reward of 100,000 yen as a bonus. After giving it some thought, Yashiro refused to take the mission, as he, just like most professional braves, would find better paying jobs that wouldn't require that much risk. When Sayara argued that she can ask for Joe to accompany her instead, Yashiro decided to accompany her, since he was worried for his fate if anything were to happen to Sayara. The next day, Sayara injected herself with E3 and took the lead to the warehouse, after handing the promised E3 to Yashiro. When it came to her powers, Sayara's were the ability to know where threats are, be it enemies or traps, which can count up to 200 threats. Yashiro was impressed by that, but even more so with Sayara's refusal to speak about further details regarding her ability. Unlike Aki and Yukine, once inside the warehouse, the two were on high alert. Since they found nothing on the upper floors, Yashiro argued that Sayara could report what she found and call it a day. However, Sayara thought it'd be best to find the transceiver, which will need her to head downstairs. Yashiro argued that they'd be pretty lucky if they were to find it, especially since he wasn't willing to use any E3. Seeing that Sayara insisted on going downstairs, even though she couldn't sense any enemies down there, Yashiro decided to put the young lady through a courage test. After further inspections, the two came into a room full of caged animals, which turned out, after Yashiro turning the lights on, to be police dogs, including Kogumi, the Shiba, as well as other animals. After letting the dog out, Kogumi led the duo to a closet, which Yashiro opened, only to learn that it contained the panda that got recently kidnapped, which became horrifically twisted. If that wasn't enough, the duo got attacked by a child called Yusuke, whom they reasonably looked down on for his young age. However, Sara took notice that an enemy was approaching, whom she identified as a Dark Lord, which made Yashiro inject himself with E3 before advising Sayara to make sure not to eliminate the incoming enemy if they turned out to be another child. This wasn't out of an awake consciousness, but rather from the Academy regulations, which suspends their Braves' activities for 2 weeks if they were to eliminate an opponent under the age of 15 no matter what. While they were on high alert, Yashiro was surprised that the incoming opponent was Wedge, who also freaked out upon seeing him, to the point he took Yusuke with him and fled the room. The Braves didn't waste any time to go on a hot pursuit for Wedge, who despite his attempts to lose them, the two insisted on following him, with Yashiro in particular insisting on eliminating him this time. After reaching what seems to be like the back rooms, Wedge finally remembered to ask Yashiro if he ever changed his mind and decided to join them. With Yashiro's refusal, Wedge prepared for battle, before revealing that his master tasked him with kidnapping animals to create a loyal army of his, using a huge variety including the panda, who was secretly waking up. Since the operation took far longer than expected, Wedge decided to abandon the facility, but not before concluding his business with Yashiro. To make matters worse for the duo, Sayara took notice of an incoming threat from above, which turned out to be the panda, to their surprise. While Wedge fled the scene just like your dad did in his holy crusade to find the milk, Yashiro was already done with pacifying the threat of his artificial hands. Now he has to find a way to finish off the chimera panda, which seemed like a daunting tall order for Yashiro. Figuratively, Yashiro advised Sayara to back off. However, Sayara figured that the chimera is much weaker than what it seems, which urged her to slay the chimera before Yashiro delivered the coup de grace to it. 3 days later, Yashiro learned from Joe, who was surfing the net, about the aftermath of the rescue operation, where Sayara took credits for it. Joe thought that the Demon King might send more enemies to deal with Yashiro, only for the latter to be indifferent. Eventually, Sayara came in and paid Yashiro the promised amount, which delighted the man, only for his dreams to come crashing down by Ed, who took the vast majority of his payment like your average tax collector does, thus leaving Yashiro with effectively nothing. Frustrated by this turn of events, Yashiro pulled his anger on Sayara, who despite heading outside as requested, thanked Yashiro for allowing her to handle the situation. Elsewhere, Ishinu was dealing with a thug, where he got severely injured, before ultimately ending up successfully eliminating the thug. Although he made sure that his pursuers were off his back, Ishinu couldn't afford to rest, as one of Arthur Pendragon's maids, Kay, approached him to request on behalf of her lord to work along 5 of their men to take down a Dark Lord, which happened to be the same that Ishinu was after for quite a while already, with the promise of splitting the bounty between all 5 of them, as well as providing him with as much E3 supplies as he wants. Hearing this, Ishinu turned down the offer, given that he's free to choose whatever jobs he wants as a freelancer. Unable to convince him to do so against his will, Kay decided to respect Ishinu's decision, before disappearing as fast as your father did. Few days later, Yashiro kept on checking his texts with Ishino, before getting to think about how traumatic a brave's work of line can be. which, in order to forget about that, Yashiro and his goons attends Ed's Goonies bar to forget about the horrific events they go through. While he was lost in thoughts, Yashiro instinctively decided to loot a deceased brave, who despite taking notice of his daughter's picture, was disappointed that he only got about 8,000 yen. Upon entering the bar, Yashiro was surprised to see Malta, whom he hadn't met in about 6 months. Unfortunately for Malta, he won't be able to see Joe and Ishino, as the former is still working, while the latter's been missing for a few days. To Yashiro's surprise, the reason Malta went missing lately was because he got a job with a company that's willing to make contract employees out of people like him. What type of jobs, you might ask? Simply having Malta in a long line to buy rare items that company needs. Just as Yashiro thought that his gold old friend managed to escape the brave biz, Malta revealed that he got fired after gouging his boss's eyes out and robbing his joint. Why, you might ask? The boss asked him to sell some gaming hardware to a poor old lady. After laughing that off with Yashiro, Malta mentioned that he came here to see if there'll be any buyer for his ticket to see King Rob in Japan. This intrigued Yashiro so much that he wanted to get that ticket. After all, King Rob is a superhuman to the likes of Yashiro and Malta. However, Yashiro's hopes and dreams were dashed when he heard that Malta is selling that ticket for 30 grand. Worse yet, Malta made it clear that he'll sell the ticket to either Joe or Ishino if Yashiro can't afford it, while stating that the amount needs to be paid right now, and that if he needed a gig to pay for that ticket, now would be the best time to find one. Fortunately for Yashiro, the 3 schoolgirls he doesn't like were already looking for him. Their task this time was about helping them with their incoming swordplay test, which will determine whether they can stay in the academy or leave it empty-handed. Yashiro rejected Aki's approach entirely, but relented to that of Sayara, as she promised that she won't snitch to anyone about his help, especially with her father looking down for her downfall. Seeing that the girls were particularly determined to hire him, Yashiro argued that they can't afford that financially, only to be proven wrong, as Aki came in with a large sum of money in hand. Left with no other option, Yashiro argued for a much higher price than what he needed, to which the girls agreed to, with Sarah giving him 50 grand in advance while promising the rest later. The girls were surprised to see Yashiro insisting on starting their practice right away instead of tomorrow morning, and not even the thought that academy ground is prohibited to enter at night could dissuade him from doing so. Despite that, Yukine in particular became super excited to follow Yashiro. Indeed, Yashiro and the girls broke into the school's gym, where they grabbed their training equipment, with Aki in particular being exceptionally excited right there. Although he got the girls to get their protective gear, Yashiro didn't see any need for himself to wear any, since he's, you guessed it, a pro. Although Aki wanted to be the first to attack, Yukine actually took the initiative on the attack. Seeing this, Yashiro responded by throwing all of the training swords on the ground, which ruined Yukine attack's momentum entirely. However, the night was not yet over, as Aki decided to charge against Yashiro, who was appalled by her using the exact same approach as Yukine. However, she managed to keep up with his attacks, as reading his mind facilitated trading blows with him. However, making her intentions to make a counterattack obvious was what led to her loss. While he was giving advice to Aki, Yashiro surprised Sarah by throwing a sword towards her. Although she repelled it, she found herself wide open for Yashiro. Sarah argued that his approach was not fair, only for Yashiro to make it clear that her enemies will never care about having a fair fight against her. Eventually, Yashiro managed to get the girls to try to attack him once again, only to pacify Yukine with his jacket, Aki with his boot, and Sarah with Yukine in person, until the trio ran out of breath. Sarah in particular was frustrated by Yashiro playing it dirty, to which Yashiro responded that he understood why they were losing to him. When it came to criticism, Yashiro started with Sarah, who got spooked very easily, and her reaction to that, as well as her brash attitude, shows that Sarah is the type that would prefer avoiding fighting outright if needed, since she was the third to attempt attacking him during sparring. Moreover, Yashiro also figured that her attitude to finish fights very early on is what always makes her on the receiving end, which he figured to be an attitude she learned during training. He was right about that. As such, Yashiro concluded that Sayara would need to care more about winning no matter what, even if it meant taking down her opponent with her. Next was Yukine, who Yashiro was surprised that she's fine the way she is in training. Hearing this, the person that claimed that she never snitches on others, decided to snitch on Yukine's weakness being purely academic, especially when she caught her writing in specific codes that resembled children's scribbles for some reason. Not taking kindly to being interrupted, Yashiro snapped at Sayara briefly, before informing Yukine that she had no major issues. Seeing that she wants to get stronger right now, Yashiro snapped at her by insisting that he'll help her out eventually. And then the main show came in, Aki, who was a total mess that Yashiro didn't know from where to start. Aki was surprised by this, but Yashiro insisted that there's so many things that seemed wrong. Firstly, he noted that Aki's approach to fighting appeared very reluctant, which appeared in the fight against Abmer Thorns, where she genuinely believed that she could win without eliminating anyone, thus making it an issue that is beyond her strength in the first place. However, Aki argued that she was taught that braves are meant to bring hope to others, not hurt them. Aki was well aware that being a brave is a tall order, which is why she argued that it'd be best to make the approach that could ensure achieving an ideal outcome. Yashiro was surprised by Aki's determination to stay true to her ideals, which is the exact opposite of his creed. While he was thinking of going harsher on her, they noticed that there were people after them. As such, Yukine decided to turn off the lights. Sayara was worried that they might get caught, but Yashiro tasked Aki and Sayara with beating the guards to force them into silence, while arguing that that's the perfect opportunity for them both to improve. After they hid, Aki still argued that hurting security guards would still be wrong, but Yashiro dismissed that, before asking the girls to think that they're helping them with their training. While Aki and Sayara were arguing over taking Yashiro's claims seriously, Yukine still insisted that she gets trained some more too, to which Yashiro promised to do so as long as she heeds his orders, starting with sitting still. Before they knew it, Ito and Levi entered the gym, where the latter in particular was dead serious about figuring who breached into school at this hour. By the time they reached the throne training equipment, Ito thought that they must have run off, but Levi argued otherwise, as she suggested they remain on high alert. For his part, Yashiro became aware that these two are not teachers or security guards, which facilitated his task, as he threw a coin to distract Ito and Levi, before pushing both Aki and Sayara down. To his surprise, Sayara immediately went on the offensive, before she got picked down by Levi. While that was disappointing, Aki's failure to hit her opponent was far more disappointing. Seeing that these opponents are dangerous, Yashiro injected himself with E3, before requesting Yukine's help to bail out with Aki and Sayara. Although Yashiro managed to fend off Levi, he was surprised to see Sayara being paralyzed. Worse yet, Ito lost control of himself, which made him grow another arm, just like Amber Thorn's lord did. Fortunately for Aki, Yukine managed to get her out of danger, but the situation was still abysmal, especially with Ito pointing out to Levi that Yashiro is the one they're after. Meanwhile, Yashiro tried to pick Sayara up to flee the scene. Once they reached the academy's gate, Sayara attempted to argue against leaving, but eventually ended up relenting to Yashiro's persistence that she does. As she did, Yashiro found himself fighting Levi on his own, whom he assumed has the ether perception of tracking targets. As Levi started the attack, Yashiro took notice of a dragon's badge on her hoodie before realizing that she's intending to eliminate him for good. Yashiro tried to argue that they move on, but Levi was in no mood to negotiate, as she attacked more vigorously. While Yashiro was taken aback by that, Aki came in to the rescue, albeit she got cast aside briefly. Naturally, Yashiro wasn't pleased with having her by his side, as he was more worried about Yukine, to whom Aki assured him that she must have escaped by now. With no proper assistant by his side, and with no proper weapon to fight, let alone Levi outclassing him in strength, Yashiro was in a precarious situation. A solution was needed. Just as he was thinking of what Levi's ether perception can track, Aki mentioned that Levi tracks sense. Although Yashiro got the information he needed, he didn't appreciate how much of a yapper Aki was. While the two were arguing, Levi decided to capitalize on that and attack Aki, only for Yashiro to come in and intercept her attack before managing to pacify her. Although he didn't eliminate her, Yashiro couldn't tell who Levi and her comrade was. Just as he began to contemplate what to do with her, Ito appeared out of nowhere, where after claiming that Levi is a proud soul, suggested that they forget this fight ever took place. Before Yashiro could even answer, Aki's happy-go-lucky personality kicked in to threaten the thug, while bragging about how her master will catch him every time. Not wanting to get involved in any more trouble, Yashiro left the scene. Once they were in the alleyway's safety, Yashiro began to think of his last encounter with Ito, who called his last move as a draw. In his mind, his reaction to Levi's attack would always ensure his victory no matter how she reacts afterward. When he asked about her goofiness, however, Aki answered that she was getting as excited as he is, especially after hearing a lot about him from her late father. Just as she began to talk about the contrast between the moment she met him and the more she dug into his thoughts, Yashiro asked about who her father was. The answer was shocking, as Aki is Takamiya Kiyohito's daughter, who was his late master. Before she knew it, Aki began to talk about her relationship with her father, especially after her parents got divorced. To Yashiro's surprise, Kiyohito always spoke well of being a brave. When asked about his reasoning to become a one, Yashiro began having a flashback of his own past. 7 years ago, Yashiro dropped out of high school for personal reasons, and then got kicked out of his parents' house, which eventually led him to running errands for some Dark Lord in Ikebukuro. During one of the intense fights between Braves and Yashiro's boss, the latter found himself becoming unemployed, when Kiyohito eliminated his patron. Left with no other options, Yashiro somehow managed to force himself into becoming Kiyohito's assistant. According to Aki, this probably explains why her dad always had a lofty attitude towards those weaker than him. Furthermore, Aki also mentioned that Kiyohito always spoke happily about him, especially when it came to being a talented individual, which was demonstrated in the many battles he fought in. This didn't make sense to Yashiro, as the master he knew was often weak-willed, coward, and cautious, to the point where he could be cold-blooded and ruthless at times. On top of that, it was also that same Kiyoshi that mentioned that being a brave is the lowest kind of scum, as well as recommending people to stay away from this biz altogether. Although it's been years since Kiyohito passed away, Yashiro was still convinced that being a brave is terrible business. As such, he argued that Kiyohito might have been lying to his daughter. Despite that, Aki argued that Yashiro is a good brave for helping, in a striking contrast to everything he claimed earlier. As Aki were to stand in defense of her father's ideals, Yashiro intimidated her into going back home already. Seeing that his head is starting to hurt, Yashiro began to think of reaching Ed's bar as fast as possible, where he hoped to meet his friends, drink, eat pizza, and play cards games. Upon entering the bar, Yashiro was met with Sayara, who immediately began to ask him questions about where he was and why he was late. Unfortunately for him, Ed told her that he's going to go get something to eat, before leaving suddenly with Malta. Since it was late for him to make it back home, Yashiro argued that it was best he head here instead. As for Sayara, she wanted to make sure that Yashiro was safe and sound, which seems surprising to Yashiro that she's a normal person, despite looking like a delinquent. After complimenting the student, Yashiro proceeded to talk to her about her ability to sense enemies' strength, which Sayara claimed that her father often called it out as a threat level sensor. Considering that she didn't phase before the chimera, while chickening out before Levi, Sayara admitted that she was indeed afraid before the latter, to which Yashiro told her that she's too kind to become a brave, which is why she should quit. Seeing that she wasn't willing to do that in a million years, Yashiro assured her that his late master also assured him that it's fine to be afraid of an opponent, as long as she can manage to control her fears before it costs her her life, which is something that can be obtained through experience. In that regard, Aki stands as an exception, as she jumps into fights with no fears. Thinking about her irritated Yashiro to the point he had to ask Sayara about her deal, to which she stated that Aki brags a lot about her ability to read other people's minds. However, since she can't tell what others think initially, she unintentionally uses that ability on them. If anything, Sayara didn't know much about Aki, but she still seemed like a nice person to work with, despite being a weirdo that butts into other people's businesses without a warning, as well as showing up to help with absolutely nothing to help with. While the two were talking, Joe showed up with a plain face, refusing to talk or hear anything, especially his job. Seeing this, Yashiro assumed that Joe must have messed up the job. However, Joe regained some of his composure to finally talk. Seeing that Yashiro was oblivious to the news of this morning, Joe informed him that a dippy-looking corpse was found in a back alley in Shinokubo, before turning in to brag about the details of the injuries found on the corpse, including half of a dragon's mask, just like the one that Levi had in her fight against him earlier. Little did Yashiro know that the corpse found was that of Ishino, to which he couldn't even believe the news for a second. A few years ago, Ishino asked his friends about what would any of them do if they or their friends died, given how daunting their line of work is. Joe laughed it off, as he thought that he's invincible. Malta, although not casting that idea out of his mind, he wanted to die with a large bang, but he wasn't willing to give up just like that, nor was he ever planning on being sentimental about it. As for Yashiro, he was of the same mind as Malta, which made Ishino conclude that he'll make sure that whosoever will eventually eliminate him will have a glorious death knell on their lips. Back then, Yashiro believed that they were all putting on a facade of toughness because all four of them wanted to seem impressive. Now, however, their resolve will be put to the test. The next day after Ishino's death, Yashiro kept contact with Joe about their fallen comrades' records, to which the latter made it clear that the cops are still after those, and that they'll be ready by tomorrow if anything. As for Yashiro, he concluded that Count Cross of the Six Senses was a bust, as they proved to know nothing about what happened to Ishino. Suddenly, Joe informed Yashiro about the half-dragon emblem that was found, which belongs to a gang that's been dealing E4 substances to other Dark Lords. Hearing this, Yashiro assumed that Joe might have learned that from Matsugi. He was right, as the latter had sold Ishino to the half-dragon. Eventually, the two agreed to meet at Joe's garage on Tuesday. While Yashiro was about to grab a hamburger to eat, Malta came in with an unpleasant surprise for the YouTube lords of copyrights, before getting disappointed that he can't bring Sahara to meet that same fate as well, as Yashiro argued against it. Despite the latter's previous excitement to see the underworld for what it is, he now was about to throw up from this horrible turn of events. The next morning, Yashiro went to buy 15 doses of E3, much to the surprise of Haibara the shopkeeper, who assumed that Yashiro was going to consume them all on his own, despite the latter's claims that they were for a whole group. While he was at it, Yashiro learned from Aki that he can oversee her exam on Friday at 5 p.m. in freedom timing, to which he responded that he's busy. After leaving the shop, Yashiro couldn't stop thinking about the approach needed to track Levi and Ito, because the slightest mistake would ultimately lead to his and his friend's demise. Furthermore, he was well aware that there are 4 more accomplices in eliminating Ishino, who wore him down from his E3's effect before eliminating him. For Yashiro, there's only one potential gang that has this pattern of behavior. Eventually, Yashiro went to the Shinjuku Dark Lord response team, where he reported that he suspects the Count of Twin Pincers to be the main culprits. To his luck, the department, led by Mika, had plenty of records in regard of his minions, as well as his pattern of behaviors, which indicates that he's cowardly smart, and yet Yashiro disagreed with. Nevertheless, Mika proceeded to inform him that a civilian had put a bounty atop one of the Twin Pincers' minions, namely the father of said minion, Harumi Koji, in an attempt to ensure his victory in the incoming elections. Yashiro wasn't interested in the father's background for obvious reasons, but he became intrigued upon learning that the posted bounty is a beefy 20 million yen, as long as the minion is brought back alive. Who might that minion be, you might ask? It's actually one of the Harumi siblings that were accompanying Wedge, more precisely the younger brother. To the father, he didn't care much for his daughter, who has always been astray, but was genuinely more concerned about his son's well-being. Despite that, Yashiro remained indifferent to the politician's son's age, as well as his sister's ether perception was really nasty, especially that of the girl. Subsequently, Yashiro decided to make no promises of ensuring their safety if he ever ran into them, but still went ahead and took the locations of the Twin Pincers from Maki. According to reports, the Twin Pincers was a brave until 4 years ago, who was more of a busybody, as he gathered a group of friends before beginning to operate as something of a school of swordsmanship. However, after one particular hunt where his entire group got wiped out, Wedge found himself alone and unable to make ends meet, which forced him into working as the minion of the Coffin Count of Storms by training and overseeing the 100 combatants that still serves the Dark Lord. Most of these combatants are kids with no place to stay, who either ran away from home or couldn't afford to stay with their parents or within the system for whatever reason. Reading this report, and given the fact that Wedge kidnapped a panda and transformed it into a chimera, Malta became assured that Wedge is a monster in his own right. As such, Yashiro argued that the best way to collect intel about Wedge and his Dark Lord would be through taking one of his people alive. Eventually, the two arrived at an abandoned factory, where Yashiro reminded Malta that their mission must be non-lethal under all circumstances. While Yashiro got his hands full with repelling incoming attacks of enemy combatants, Wedge and the Harumi siblings arrived to fight the brave in their stead, as none of them were a match for Yashiro, to which they obliged, save for Yusuke, who inflicted severe damage on the floor when he hit it with his bat, before Yashiro managing to pacify the kid. Livid by this sight, Wedge ordered the kids to abandon ship. This surprised Yashiro, as he claimed that he came to talk. According to Wedge, he had no idea of how Ishinu met his demise. If anything, he always believed that Ishinu was a deviant serial killer. When Yashiro revealed that Ishinu was investigating the distribution circle of E4 substances, which is assumed to be produced by the Twin Pincers, Wedge confessed that he had no idea about that. If anything, Wedge claimed that their gang was trying to figure out how to create E4 themselves. Seeing that Yashiro isn't acquainted with the half-dragon in any way, Wedge revealed that the Dark Lord works in arms and substances traffic, as they use their control of E4s and E3s to destabilize the underworld. Although Wedge couldn't afford to give away the perpetrator's identity, he made it clear that the latter is a common enemy of them. For Wedge, his ultimate goal is stability, which would ensure the steady rise of his Dark Lord. Yashiro, however, wasn't buying that, as Wedge attempted countless times to kidnap him, thus putting his credibility into question. By the time Malta finished dealing with the fleeing goons that were attempting to flee, he caught up with Yashiro, who then proceeded to prepare for the fight to take Harumi's son. To which the older sister vowed that she wouldn't let them take Yoshi. The older sister made the first move, only for it to fail miserably with Yashiro electrocuting her. Just as she was about to gather her blood fragments back, Yashiro suddenly darted forward and cut the girl down, to the absolute shock and horror of everyone there. Malta, on the other hand, immediately moved to clash swords with Yoshi. However, upon attempting to incapacitate the boy, Malta was surprised to see him being protected with his ability. Seeing that his best attempts were getting bested by Yoshi's inner shield, he decided to not use his sword, as he turned to capture the boy barehanded and pin him down. Meanwhile, Wedge pressed the attack in a similar style, which Yashiro has grown familiar with by now. As Malta assured Yoshi that he could always escape home after being taken back there, Yoshi became so traumatized that he begged Wedge to save him, as he didn't want to go back there ever again. As Wedge directed his attacks to Malta, Yoshi got caught in the crossfire, which resulted in him losing his life, to the shock of Yashiro and Malta. Yashiro in particular was livid by this turn of events, as Wedge had single-handedly blown his bounty. However, instead of being shocked or panicking about eliminating one of his soldiers, Wedge made it clear that he had long promised the Harumi siblings to eliminate them, if being dragged back home became a viable possibility, and now he had simply fulfilled that promise. After all, he provided the children that came to him with dignity and shelter, which no one would ever provide them with. This didn't pass on Yashiro, as he considered Wedge's act to be worse than Brave's. Before long, the two went back to fighting, where Yashiro clashed swords directly with Wedge this time. However, he was taken aback when he saw Wedge's ability to control other people's gloves. If anything, Wedge came so close to eliminating Yashiro, who managed in the nick of time to dodge certain defeat, before taking off his gloves. Injured, outnumbered, and outgunned, Wedge made for an obvious choice, while Yashiro was left unable to follow up. That night, Harumi Kuji heard about the unfortunate fate that befell his offspring, to which he was so furious that he broke the glassy table before his wife, while his youngest daughter was overhearing the whole fight with a blade in hand. And the rest is history. With a week passing since Ishinu's death, Yashiro and Malta's progress wasn't even modest, as they managed only to find underlings, who provided them with little to no useful intel, which required Yashiro to think outside the box. By the time he got to the bar, Yashiro was surprised to see Ed waiting for him with a bouquet of flowers in hand. In fact, this isn't the first time it was sent to him that way, but it contained a letter requesting that Yashiro join them for work this winter. Just as Yashiro dismissed the letter, some academy girls whom we know and love platonically entered the bar. Naturally, Yashiro wasn't happy to see them, especially when Aki assumed that a lady must have sent him that bouquet, which Yashiro disguised as being sent to Ed. More importantly, the girls came in to ask Yashiro about his reasoning to not observe their practical exam last week, which, despite Yashiro going through so much that he forgot about it completely, he decided to act cool and act as if he didn't want to attend it anyway. However, Yashiro was surprised when Sayori didn't show up, which was explained by her having cleanup duty at school. When it came to the test, Sara and Yukini passed it, but Aki had a draw, which requires her now to have another test. Aki described her opponent as a tough nut to crack, and that their fighting was an epic close-fought battle. Yashiro was skeptical of the whole spiel, while Yukini claimed that Aki's opponent was just average at best. Aki argued against it, but Yashiro decided to trust the former's claims instead. Still, although he was relieved that his advice was definitely useful, Yashiro concluded that the fact that Aki's fight dragged on for so long meant that she wasn't able to make full use of his instructions. Aki confessed that she listened, as well as attempting to do the same trick he performed against Levi that night, much to Yashiro's surprise, as he only refused to eliminate Levi to avoid any needless headache. However, Aki interpreted that as modesty. Dismayed by her inability to comprehend him, Yashiro asked her to read through his mind properly, which she proved completely incapable of doing, as she claimed that she needed to know him better first. Was it counterintuitive? Absolutely, but did it annoy Yashiro further than he already was? Absolutely, as Yukina also began to insist that she get another lesson from him, despite Yashiro's claims that he's busy for the foreseeable future. Eventually, Yashiro caved in to pressure, as he decided that their next lesson should be next Saturday, which will involve training in social studies, to Aki and Yukina's surprise. After informing them of when and where to meet, Yashiro made sure to ask them both not to eat anything before their meeting took place. Not because he was going to treat them to some fancy schmancy meal per se, but because there's a very good chance they'll throw up if they do. Instead of arguing what will be happening in their training session, Aki began to argue more about why Yashiro is talking to Sara of all people, via phone no less, especially since he hadn't exchanged contacts with Aki yet, despite claiming herself as Yashiro's first apprentice. In only a matter of time, both Aki and Yukine insisted on exchanging contacts with Yashiro, despite the latter of the students having no phone at all. while the former began addressing her irrelevant concerns about Yashiro's bias towards Yukine against her, which Yashiro didn't even bother hiding. Later that day, Yashiro and Joe went through Ishino's belongings, where after Joe took all of his late friend's gunpowder, the two began contemplating which card the winner could have from his unlimited decks.
Draw your last pathetic card so I can end this, Yugi.
My grandpa's deck has no pathetic cards, Kaiba.
While they were at it, Sayara showed up to see what favor Yashiro needed her help with. In fact, Yashiro wanted to confirm whether Ito and Levi were involved with the round table or not, to which Sayara didn't have much of an idea about that, let alone her father's knowledge of it, as he's so unpredictable that she doesn't even like to talk to him much. However, she thought that there's a good chance he knows about it, which could arguably be interpreted by his ether perception. After all, Arthur figured out what happened with her at the Amber Thorns incident without her telling him. Just as she thought that was what she was needed for, Yashiro surprised her by saying that he needed her for something else instead, which is related to a woman dressed that Ishino was hiding, whom I'm as oblivious as Yashiro about why Ishino would be hiding. Probably he was some sort of a femboy fetishist or something. Be that as it may, Yashiro requested Sayara to choose some dresses for herself as well as Aki and Yukine since they'll be used for their next lesson. This surprised Sayara as she thought that it'd be best if the other two would choose their own dresses, with Sayara being left to figure herself out. Yashiro got back to playing with Joe, while discussing the intel he got from Malta, as he learned from the guy he interrogated that Ido was a notorious brave who wreaked havoc in Kansai until last year, as he was known for never working with the losing side. Although Yashiro couldn't tell with certainty what Ido's ether perception was about, he was certain that both Ido and Levi are washed-up braves who became outlaws. Worse yet, they infiltrated the academy easily. Since Yashiro wasn't sure if they knew who he was or not, it wasn't clear to him and Joe if running into him was a coincidence, which is why Yashiro thought that it's best they ask someone more acknowledged than pincers, especially since they went as far as to invite him. To further complicate things for him, Yashiro will have to take the schoolgirls alongside him. If anything, Yashiro was aware that taking Joe and Malta would be considered as a declaration of war, especially with the last words that Ishino left him in his recorder, who entrusted him with taking care of the three girls from any danger, especially that they must be connected to the half-dragon in some way. And Yashiro, although reluctant, had prepared himself for the rendezvous he made with the trio. To his surprise, Sayara arrived 5 minutes earlier than expected, and her taste in clothes proved to be girlier than expected. Although he addressed that as a compliment for her, Sayara was embarrassed, so much so she argued that wearing this dress, as well as setting up the other two, was an ordeal in its own right. Yukine in particular was bothered by how hard it was to move in her dress, to which Sayara assured her that she was finding it difficult to move in her own dress as she was. While the two were talking about how much Yukine liked the color white, Aki arrived, embarrassed from the prospect of being scouted as a model, which made the other three move on without her. It was only when Sayara explained it by being her master's choice that Aki accepted the explanation as is, even if it meant that Yukine and Sayara's clothing were meant for a better lesson, unlike hers. Nevertheless, Yashiro addressed that his approach to the previous lesson was pretty straightforward. This time, however, Yashiro will put them both against multiple enemies, where they'll see their hostility upon going in. However, Yashiro also made it clear that this fight will be their opportunity to use whatever technique they might want to try, since they'll take part in a party held by the Coffin Count of Storms, who's arguably the strongest Dark Lord in Western Tokyo. In the underworld, these parties are means for intimidation, which is expressed through the attendees putting up masks. Since he was aware that Ishino was eliminated in their turf, Yashiro was certain that Coffin definitely knows something. While he was lost in thoughts, the girls behind him began to throw a tantrum, which made Yashiro lash out at them before entering the building. As expected of a mafia boss, the party he was holding was full of grandiose. Upon entering the building, Yashiro introduced himself as Ed Cyrus, who came here on behalf of his lord, King Rob. As he waited for the receptionist to look up his name, Aki wondered if the blue guy in the crowd was a Dark Lord or not, which got her briefly chastised, before Yashiro decided to warn them against certain Dark Lords. Firstly, the Count of Silver String, the blue guy Aki pointed at earlier. Secondly, the Count of the Warped Garden. Thirdly, the Counts of Mournful Pulsation and Mournful Spray. Please bear with me with the names, I know they're impossible to remember. Anyways, the girls were completely terrified by this revelation, which was intended by Yashiro, who believed that improvising is part of this lesson. By then the receptionist informed Yashiro that his name, Ed Cyrus, wasn't found on the list. In response, Yashiro pulled out a dose of E3 and injected himself with it, followed up by the trio and the guards charging towards him, thus starting a messy affair. With disarray now becoming the order of the day, Yashiro thought it better to teach both Aki and Sayara a fundamental move that will prove indisposable for the future. The trick was simple. They'd have to bind the enemy's sword and then get him rid of the ability to hold a sword permanently. After he explained the details, Yashiro sat down to watch both girls demonstrate their skills. Aki was the first to do so, and she failed at that miserably. Sayara, on the other hand, was faring better against her opponent, as she was raised by a top-tier swordsman since she was young. With Yukine doing well on her own, Yashiro became convinced that Aki is the weakest and most problematic of the bunch, to whom he ordered to be more aggressive. However, being the idiotic, happy-go-lucky that she is, Aki completely missed the opportunity to strike a finishing blow, until she found herself on the verge of getting eliminated, if it wasn't for Sayara's timely intervention, who executed Yashiro's move to perfection. While Sayara got praised by Yashiro for her perfect cover-up, Aki got scorned at her excuses and principles of being a noble brave that's so much more fancier and respectable than everyone else. While he lividly ordered her to read his mind, Yukine notified him that a strange person is approaching. While the guests were excited by her arrival, Yashiro had a very bad feeling about it, because that person is none other than Lord of Storm Coffin, who was relieved to see Yashiro agree to join after hundreds of invitations. This Dark Lord used to be an executive from a Yakuza group in Kansai, who after the BFE conflict from 2 years ago, managed to rally all the organizations that had lost their leadership, until she became one of the most prominent Dark Lords in the country. Yashiro's first encounter with her was about 6 months ago, where he was trying to eliminate another Dark Lord. Before he knew it, Yashiro eliminated 2 or 3 minions of hers before leaving. However, Storm remained persistent in having him get her attention. Upon seeing her, Sayara was stunned by how powerful Storm is. Yukine also noticed how strong Storm is, but Yashiro refused to let her fight her, as he wasn't keen on fighting her in the first place, despite Yukine's attempts to ignite the fight. Seeing that Storm was addressing Yashiro's students as exotic animals, Aki tried to respond on Yashiro's behalf, only to find herself getting kicked. After Storm asking him if her offers of 10 million a month had finally paid off, Yashiro decided to start by complaining about her intimidation attempts, as well as her attempts to launder her cash with his account. Eventually, Yashiro learned that Pinsir is on leave for the time being, as he was worn out from the previous day's events. Nevertheless, Yashiro mentioned the half-dragon issue, which Storm rightfully concluded that Yashiro is seeking to avenge Ishino's death, much to Yashiro's surprise. According to Storm, the half-dragon has also been a nuisance to her, as they were sabotaging the established status quo in the underworld. When Yashiro mentioned that they were making a mess on her turf using E4, Storm became relieved that he was understanding of the situation, which made her suggest they work hand in hand against these people, while going as far as to guarantee that he'll be taken care of for the rest of his life. However, Yashiro refused the offer. However, he just needed Storm to inform him of where the half-dragons could be found. Instead, Storm decided to offer Yashiro anything he wants as long as he and his companions defeat 4 of her Storm Guards. Yashiro argued against getting the students involved, but Storm insisted that he'll have to take the deal if he ever wants to get the intel he so desperately wants. Hearing this, Yashiro realized how precarious his position is, especially with Sayara and Aki being a liability to him more than an asset. Before Yashiro could find an answer to such a threat, Sayara alerted him to approaching enemies from all directions. Worse yet, these enemies had decided that they had had enough of life before transforming into horrific monsters that eliminated everyone in their wake. Upon this sight, panic became the order of the day. While the monsters were wreaking havoc, Storm eliminated one of them and dipped out, thus leaving Yashiro and the others to face this mess on their own. Just like other Dark Lords, Yashiro ordered the girls to not make a move, especially Aki. What he didn't know, however, was that Yukine had encountered those monsters, called Nephilims, when she was much younger. While Yashiro were contemplating his next course of action, Yukine attacked without a warning, which made Yashiro and Aki move to reinforce her. Although she managed to incapacitate it, it was thanks to the other two that the monster ceased to be a threat. Yashiro tried to stop her, but was unable to do so after seeing how apoplectic she was, which forced Aki to get the others not to let Yukine fight on her own. Although Yashiro was able to handle the Nephilim on his own with ease, Yukine's irrationality led her to get caught out of position, as well as Aki and Sayara getting tossed aside. When she was about to be eliminated for good, Yashiro came to the rescue, who in turn got saved by Sayara, albeit Yashiro got severely injured in the process. Seeing how the girls were struggling to find a plan to make it out alive, Yashiro got the girls to listen to him for once, as he needed to adjust their crummy teamwork. Yashiro was aware that their pattern was having Yukine as the vanguard. Aki followed her up, while Sayara dealt the final blow, which wasn't optimal at all, as he assumed that the academy wanted to keep Arthur's daughter in the safest position. With this knowledge, Yashiro became aware that his life would depend on giving these 3 effective commands. After giving it some thought, Yashiro ordered Aki to take the lead by targeting the Nephilim's knees. Saira was tasked to aim for the back, to prevent the enemy from getting the chance to fight back. Yashiro also made it clear that if she fails at that, they'll all be cut down to pieces. As for Yukine, she's tasked with backing up her comrades. Seeing that Yukine was determined not to let him down this time, Yashiro became somewhat relieved, which made him publicly state that this will be a live exercise for them. With the Nephilim attacking first, Aki decided to make the first move. Yashiro was well aware that she was so awful at fighting, as long as she wasn't fighting a human, that is. Followed up by her first strike, Yukine followed suit, as she got rid of the Nephilim's arm, before Saira delivered the death blow. Seeing that things were seeming to go well so far, Yashiro's only concern was his very own injury, which made him contemplate sacrificing his left arm, since his right leg's injury was preventing him from making any moves. Although that would be painful, Yashiro thought that he still had time on his side. Unexpectedly for him, however, Aki came in to shield him from the strike, which despite resulting in getting her injured and her shield broken, gave Yashiro the opportunity to finish off the Nephilim without getting injured himself. Nevertheless, Yashiro was dismayed and infuriated at Aki. Not because of having her abandoning her position alone, but more importantly because she represents every ideal that Yashiro himself had stood for many years ago. Seeing how impressed Warped Garden was by how well the girls were fighting, Silver String wondered if he was the mastermind behind this entire scene, only for the former to assume that it was a rare effort by Storm to entertain her guests. Hearing this, Silver String figured that they're screwed, before excusing himself after putting an end to the mournful sisters. Nevertheless, the fighting still raged on, with Aki still deciding to keep on fighting for her beliefs, instead of running away. In the background, Yashiro was thinking of injecting himself with 2 more doses of E3, which would heal his damaged limbs instantly, despite the horrendous side effects he would have to bear, as is the case of 60% of people. Before he could do that, however, a mysterious figure blew her whistle to get the monsters to withdraw. As it turned out, that person was Levi, who was accompanied by Ito. Seeing that Yashiro was still eager to fight despite his injuries, Levi was just as eager as he was to give battle, but Ito was less keen. As such, he tasked her with leaving the scene while he'll deal with Yashiro in person. After making it clear for all 3 girls that he'll allow them to leave the scene unharmed if they were to not fight him, Yashiro realized that Ito is being careful in his approach. Aware that Ito was hoping to have both Yukine and Saira knocked out before getting Yashiro and Eki surrounded, Yashiro began contemplating injecting himself with another E3 dose, before deciding to buy himself some time. The two then proceeded to talk about Ishino, where Ito confirmed that Yashiro knew who he was, before calling him out as a real piece of work that eliminated 3 of his men, before getting rid of Ito's arm. Despite his frustration with that, Ito remained willing to continue fighting, as he saw that that's what gives life its ecstasy, according to Yashiro, that is, who's now about to attack Ito. Although Ito dismissed the idea that the dead do not care about revenge, Yashiro believed that that isn't true, as he heard Ishino's last will, which also included recording the whole thing transpiring beforehand. While Yukina and Seira were fighting against the Nephilim's tooth and nail, Aki began approaching Ito to fight, and not even Yashiro's orders to back away could make her do so. Despite her inability to be a good match for Ito, as well as annoying Yashiro for her sheer incompetence, Aki managed to buy enough time for Yashiro to calm down and heal enough before proceeding to read his mind, as Yashiro instructed her to do. As she did, Aki suddenly darted forward. This was part of Yashiro's plan, which was built upon realizing that Ito isn't used to his oversized arm yet, thus allowing Aki to put Ito on the back foot this entire time. Getting fed up with Aki's shenanigans, Ito kicked her away. Just as he was about to finish her off, however, Yashiro healed enough to throw a dagger at Ito before going to deliver the final blow in person. With Ito and the Nephilims being dealt with, Yashiro couldn't help but mock Ishino for losing to someone as dumb as Ito. With Ito no longer being of this world, Yashiro and Saira managed to eliminate an incoming Nephilim before concluding the day. Despite that, Aki thought it best to press on to pursue Levi and her potential companions, but she was, just like Yashiro and the others, in no shape whatsoever to do so, as she ended up being put on the ground to lie down. Worse yet, no amount of E3 could generate Aki's lost eye, or so Yashiro thought, as the moment he was going to inspect her injury further, her eye regenerated, much to Yashiro's surprise. Since that day, Storm had disappeared. As for Levi's fate, people believed that she got eliminated as well, but Yashiro was certain that she must have hidden somewhere. Hearing this, Ed assumed that Yashiro must have been done with his revenge quest, but that could not be further from the truth. In fact, Yashiro was still determined to get to the bottom of this matter and figure out who was behind the assassination of Ishino. Furthermore, Yashiro was also interested in figuring out what's happening with Aki, especially since she regenerated an eye. Granted, Yashiro asked Ed also about whether his master was actually married or not. Ed tried to change the subject, but Yashiro insisted, as he revealed that her regeneration ability is something that only E4 consumers are capable of, let alone that Aki herself was surprised by such a revelation. Hearing this, Ed refused to answer, which made Yashiro even more persistent, only to get no answer and lose the game, much to the recently arrived Joe's amusement. While Ed went to get the food and drinks that Joe requested, Joe himself was in such a good mood for being productive, especially after beating some small dark lords, which made him even refuse to accompany Yashiro on a trip he was planning to Hokkaido, especially that Joe was well aware that they'll meet with a priest that he hates with his guts. Granted, Yashiro assumed that Joe was eavesdropping on him regarding his master, even though he was loudly yapping about him with Ed. Although he was aware that he lacks Joe's good terms with the bureaucrats and that he shouldn't dig into his master's past, Yashiro still called his friend a gorilla for merely suggesting that he get Malta to accompany him instead. If anything, Ed mentioned that Malta went on a well-paying gig, so he won't be available for the foreseeable future. Unable to get anything from Joe, Yashiro asked Ed for anything about his master, which made the latter only claim that he was the strongest brave of all, yet died with no regrets over some nonsense. Hearing this, Yashiro began to remember that his master often spoke of some weird things when he got drunk, to the point where he would sound delusional. Despite that, he did remember that Kyoto had indeed mentioned that he would appreciate honorable braves, which got him mocked by Yashiro, Joe, and even Ishino before all got punished by him. These memories were what made Yashiro, deep down, admit that he never had the guts to admit that he wanted to become an idealist like Aki. While he was drinking some coke in a random restaurant, Yashiro couldn't stop thinking about the connection between Aki's regeneration ability and that of Ito to the half-dragon in E4, when he suddenly saw Yukine entering the restaurant. The latter made it clear that she barely managed to make it out of campus with how strict the security was around it. Jokes on the security for being breached by Yashiro like it was nothing. Nevertheless, the two were well aware that things were getting hectic in town lately, especially with Storm going missing, which made minor Dark Lords take on this opportunity to expand their turf. Although this might have seemed like a good money-making opportunity for Yukine, Yashiro made it clear that the hard-working braves are the ones that get eliminated very early on. Still, he was thankful for Yukine for coming in to give him some much-needed intels. As such, he decided to let her treat herself to whatever she wants. Yeah, I think you know where this is going, and Yashiro's pathetic look at his wallet says it all. Even more so was his utter awe at how she was eating massive portions in one bite, including an entire slice of cake. At least she enjoyed the food, she better did rather. More importantly for Yashiro, he began getting the answers he needed. Yukine confirmed that she used to be an ex-soldier, which explains the way she fought with daggers, let alone the way she talks. Based on that, Yashiro also assumed that Yukine came from the Shadow region in Hokkaido, where many Dark Lords have established their own city-states. The situation there got so bad that mercenaries began to make a living by keeping an eye over the Dark Lords and their minions there. In addition to mercenaries, a military organization came in to lead them in their defense. Although Yukine couldn't remember the name of her unit, she acknowledged that they were all brothers and sisters to her, and that the unit itself was her home, where they ate and trained together. It goes without saying that they also fought and patrolled together. Hearing this, Yashiro was surprised that rumors that orphans were recruited in the ranks of mercenaries in Hokkaido proved to be true, even if kids like that tend to be lifers. As he wondered the reason that the academy would recruit them, Yashiro mentioned that Yukine called the monsters from that night as Nephilims. Back in Hokkaido, these Nephilims were often treated like bears, who never bothers human gatherings usually. If push came to shove, it was the adults' duty to fight these monsters, until their camp got attacked by a whole horde of them. Granted, none of the soldiers managed to survive against the incoming horde of Nephilims, which left a much weaker Yukine back then to watch their demise as well as that of her friends, whom she desperately tried to protect with her life. Seeing that he's opening up an old wound for Yukine, Yashiro asked her to stop talking and not cry, even if she believed that her weakness and cowardice back then were the reason that her closest friend back then got unalived. Seeing that she couldn't hold her tears, Yashiro thought of what he could say to invigorate her spirit, only to decide not to, as Yukine proved to be determined enough, and it showed from the way she fought alongside him. As such, he agreed to make her stronger, and their first destination for this quest would be Hokkaido, since he got some stuff to do there anyway, much to Yukini's delight, which made her even more excited to train now that she threw a tantrum about it. Shockingly enough, Aki and Seira also arrived to see their friend with Yashiro, thus indicating that she's been followed by her friends this entire time. Left with no other option, Yashiro agreed to train Yukini, much to Aki and Seira's dismay. That concludes the anime recap. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below and I'm out.